so much for welcoming me and us here as open air artists at the Bio Station. What a special place. I mean, you're probably still, I mean, you have been working here for a while. Some of you maybe for just a short time, but I just had a wonderful time just the first few days with everybody. So thank you so much. My name is Eva-Maria Maggi. I am a recovering political science professor, turned narrative nonfiction writer, mainly interested right now anyway in biography. That also seems like something that ties us together here as artists. We kind of like to have things come to us, or stories or items find us, or we find them. And I think that's a lot how I feel in my own work. It was kind of an interesting transition from being a professor to just focusing on writing, and I feel so lucky that I have this opportunity. So I've been doing academic research a little bit all over the world. I'm originally from Germany, so I did a lot of research there. Also in Italy, where I lived for a while, and in Morocco, where I did my Ph.D. And for the last 15 years, pretty much since I moved to the US, I've been teaching at different universities. Started out with working at the University of Washington, then University of Arizona, and then 9 years ago, at the University of Montana, where I bring students into the Bob Marshall Wilderness on horseback, and sometimes I bring adults too, so if you're interested, let me know. It's a really fun class. So when I prepared for this talk, I slipped immediately into conference mode, like academic conference mode. And that's interesting because I've been doing readings and book talks for the last few years, and not too many academic conferences, but I thought, oh my gosh, you know, it's a brown bag talk. Just the title, like, wasn't okay. I'm going to present the results of my research, what I've done. And then I was like, no, wait a second, you know, this is not really what this is about. It's more about myself and my process, and kind of showing kind of what I'm planning to do here at the station. And so as an academic, that kind of feels hard in a way, because, you know, I've been trained, like most of you, you know, to kind of not hide behind research, but having the data and the history talk, you know, it's still obviously the best way to generate new knowledge. But as a nonfiction writer, the whole point of my work is to get humans kind of back into science. And so I think that's probably a good point to start there, doing work with myself. So kind of everything started for me in a way with this guy. Does that work? It doesn't. Here with the horse. So that's Smoke Elser. He's not a scientist by any means. I know he kind of threw his physics book when he was at the university all across the room. He was so frustrated. He is a packer, he's an outfitter, conservationist. And when I signed my contract at the University of Montana, I'm pretty sure, I think a week or two later, I signed up for his mule packing class. Like, I really wanted to learn how to pack a mule, and when I ride into the mountains, to be able to take a mule and all my stuff. But what happened there was kind of really a life-changing moment for me. I learned how to pack mules, which is in and of itself life-changing, but he was telling me stories. He's like the best teacher I've ever known. And he kind of stitches together his teaching of hands-on stuff with stories of his life in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. And he spent over 60 years in that landscape. And I was just fascinated and knew kind of right away I needed to preserve these stories, record them, and you know, and for some reason he agreed to do that, which is still kind of a miracle to me sometimes. And after 800 hours sitting in his barn in Missoula and listening to his stories and recording them while I was still working full-time and teaching and having a family and all that, and 7 years later, our book came out that I wrote about his life. Smoke can't read or write very well, so in a way, that was the only way for him to really have his life story shared. And it was a really fun experience, and kind of brought back my passion and love for stories and people, and telling stories about people. And I'm really grateful that I had that opportunity. So. In a way, all the book projects I'm working on since then are all Smoke's fault. I tell him that all the time. It's like, he's the reason why like these other stories kind of found me, and they literally found me. I did never really plan on doing anything more than that, but I was intrigued by telling more stories, and here I am now, kind of calling myself a biographer in a way, because I really am just fascinated by stories of people. And the story that kind of found me first was the story of the John and Frank Craighead. The book is called Brother Wild, and it's about their lives, their research. And what I found with them, they're dead. John died at the age of 100 years in 2016. I can't talk to them anymore, right? But I'm so lucky. I have this huge archive. So this entire house in Missoula, basically, or a basement filled with letters and diaries, and they made a lot of film. They did a lot of took pictures of their work. They were prolific in communicating science. I think they were one of the first who really figured out how to communicate their science. They had a strong relationship with the National Geographic magazine, published their first article when they were 16, and continued on for decades to work with them. So they were really good at communicating it. But one thing that I noticed and it's pretty much through all my work, and one thing I want you to take away from my talk here today, I guess, other than what I'm working on, is the critical role of journals in historical research and in anything when you want to talk about people. So they wrote journals. They're twin brothers. They pioneered grizzly bear research in Yellowstone. It was the still longest running study on grizzly bears ever. It was the first one really done. Over 12 years, they meticulously took scientific journals everywhere. But what I was missing at that point now, then they really started their scientific career, were the personal journals. So they had usually two. They started at the age of 6 to have journals. So one of them, here John is on the right, Frank on the left, one of them did the personal journals, the other one the scientific, and then they switched around. But later on in Yellowstone, they kind of stopped doing that. And it's really sad, but also in a way an opportunity for me to kind of bring in the texture back to these stories, to kind of really feel how it is out there, how it is to be in these woods and track a grizzly or or go after a black bear scat, which I've been doing here quite a bit, to kind of really walk these shorelines. They did work, John in particular, he was a professor at the University of Montana. He worked on Flathead Lake. I have not found any references to him ever being here at the biostation, but it would be interesting. He did geese work mainly on Wild Horse Island, so I found a bunch. He published a bunch of papers on it as well. So if anybody of you knows anything about them or has worked with them, I would be super curious to know. But journals are really, really important. And so if I want you to take away anything, is that please start a journal. Who is journaling? Let's say on a daily basis, on their scientific work or personal work. I know you are. I see you. So and it's really not that hard. I started interestingly doing it since I started doing narrative nonfiction, because I don't know, my brain has more space for it. Like when I did my Ph.D. work in Morocco, I was so focused on checking all the boxes, doing everything right, doing other interviews, doing all the archival research. And I talked to so many cool people along the way, and I saw so many interesting things, like the donkey cart next to the Porsche at the traffic light. I feel like all this stuff I remember, but I never wrote it down because I was so focused on getting this PhD done. And it's great, it has all his role, but I really wish I would have had a journal back then. So I'm having one now. And hopefully I will tell you later a little bit, like maybe 3 things that I would like you to write down if you decide to do a journal. So John and Frank, they kind of taught me a lot without obviously ever meeting them. But it's a really fun book based basically on all this material they have. And so I decided I'm going to read you just a tiny snippet of it that I'm based on scientific journals. It's at the very beginning of the book, if I keep it that way, I still don't know, where I have both brothers tracking one of their favorite grizzly bears, probably for the last time in Yellowstone, and that's kind of what the book is about. They did much more work than grizzly bears. They did a ton of work on raptors. They went to India, did some falconry there. They have a really interesting life. But this is kind of maybe to give you an idea what my work is about. So John raised his binoculars, scanning the trees for Marian's bright radio collar, the rolling sway of her shoulders, the long guard hairs tipped with silver. A late fall storm had blanketed meadows and trails with fresh snow, softening edges and soon obscuring every print. The sun dipped behind clouds and a cold southwest wind picked up. Winter was settling in the high country. They dropped off the ridge and walked towards the woods. Frank held the transceiver, a bulky 2.5-pound device the size of a cereal box, its oval antenna angled like a listening ear. John kept his eyes on the ground and trees, watching for a sign. Grizzlies often dug dens beneath roots or stumps on north-facing slopes, high up in the mountains, far from people, but sometimes near other bears. Marian's signal was weak, growing fainter, and soon snow would bury her den's entrance and silence the radio pulse entirely. It had happened before. So what I'm trying to do is basically taking the data and at that point in their lives, really prolific academic publications, and kind of connecting it with a little bit more sensory details and kind of bringing that story a little closer to people. The idea is a little bit like what it was with Hush of the Land and Smoke stories, that anybody, kid, anywhere in the world or anywhere in the country, could maybe be with them tracking a grizzly or be with them out in the field doing their research without ever actually having the chance to be there with them. So journals are really important here, and and if I could talk to them and say, oh yeah, maybe you can next time you go out, why don't you talk a little bit how, maybe how it smelled like after the rain, or if there are any other things that kind of came up other than the fact that you're counting grizzlies. And my other project really shows me how hard it can be and how important it is, or how difficult it is, I say, to write about something or write a biography if you actually don't have any journals. So this also has to do with Smoke. This is actually his distant cousin in Germany, where I'm from. This is Georg Elser. He's a completely forgotten Nazi resistance fighter. Very different, right? Also not a scientist, but that story kind of came to me through Smoke and my own upbringing. I never learned about him in school. We talk a lot about the Nazi regime, a lot of the atrocities that happened, but I never learned about him. And museums barely started including them in the past few years. The Nazis completely erased his story. So there are no journals, no letters, nothing really left of him. So to tell this story is extremely tricky. We have a Gestapo interrogation report. I have a lot of archival materials that kind of build his person. I have the things he built, the woods he walked through, the towns he lived in, but I don't have a journal. And that's tricky, but what it still doesn't mean we don't have to tell this story. It's a very important story, I think, and not only for Germany, I think in general. So I'm trying to piece them back together, but it's hard. And so journals, I think, kind of really matter, and I think in particular in times like ours. So I actually thought I had another slide there. Well, I believe that journaling, and that's kind of why I want to come back to this idea of maybe each of you starting a journal. As scientists, I think it's important that we can kind of tell these stories or tell your science stories later. Maybe you want to do it, right? You know, maybe a scientist who wrote a memoir later when they had time in their retirement, or maybe even just your kids would like to know how it actually feels like when you're out there later and just read it. And I think just to take a moment to kind of when you're out there just to write a little bit more about your sensory environment. And I think there are three main kind of tools of narrative nonfiction that I use all the time. And that you can find in books you're reading too. And that is the first one to kind of look at the setting, like kind of what's your not only necessarily only what's the weather like, but kind of how does it feel, kind of really sensory, like especially smells. Like I started including smells in my journal, so I kind of to practice that a little bit, to kind of recognize them and learning, or getting better at describing them, to really getting people there. Then characters, doesn't have to be necessarily a people, can also be non-human. When we had our little tour on Friday, I talked about the shrimp over in the lab, and I thought that was so cool, right? So the closer you go into your research, maybe you even give you give them characters in a way, and I think it's cool to learn about that, like what does that mean? A little bit what Terry talked about too. So to kind of give it a little bit more life back on the page, so to speak. And then the last one is conflict, and I don't necessarily mean, if you punch somebody in the bar that night. It's more about like even ethical dilemmas, right? So you have that, like challenges in your publications, challenges in your funding, challenges even if you're out in the field. You probably all wear the right boots or whatever, but we're going out on a field trip on Wednesday, and what were the challenges of being out there and doing your work? And I think in particular today, we will look back at this time in history in a few years, maybe in a decade or two, and we really want to know how it feels like to have lived right now. And that is, again, maybe your kids, maybe your family members, maybe yourself looking back and seeing how was that when I was working at the biostation and did all this research. Or maybe a biographer comes across your work at some point and says, oh, I would really love to write about it. And write about a little more than, just your important science. Like actually, how did you get there? How was your process? Like how do your stitches look like? And so I hope you can kind of take that away. So I will be poking you. I already started poking on Friday at the mixer. I was like, are you having a journal? Are you writing things down? And I know it's hard, right? In academia it's hard, but I think it's totally worth it. So what I'm going to do here at the biostation, already talking, look at the Crackhead project, going to work on my other ones, going to go out and explore kind of you teaching me a little bit how it is out in the field, right? I've been a political scientist. I don't know how field work really works. But I think I'm going to also write, and I started doing that, I'm going to write a biostation journal. So I think I'm going to do like maybe once a week or so. I'm going to do that on my newsletter. I'm just going to send out like a little description of our work. So be careful when you're around me. Now I'm going to ask you, of course, if I ever allow us to do that. But that's the thing. If you become a friend of a writer, you're probably going to be part of the book at some point. Yeah, so I think that's what I'm going to do, which is to show you, and maybe also me, and remind myself and show my kids actually at home what I'm doing every week, other than talking to them on the phone. So, thank you.